Welcome to Public Safety Talk Radio, the podcast for all of our heroes in public safety, including law enforcement professionals, firefighters, EMTs, corrections officers, healthcare workers, and more. The show is proud to be a part of the growing National Police Podcast Network. This episode is sponsored by Police Mortgage. Police Mortgage is a full-service mortgage company dedicated to serving police officers and first responders. Founded in 2008, Police Mortgage offers a variety of mortgage products tailored to meet the needs of those who serve and protect. Police Mortgage, for first responders who are second to none. I am Ken Bader, your host for Public Safety Talk Radio, and I have another great guest. Of course, I do. A really interesting guest that we are so fortunate to get from first responder conferences that has a number of great events coming up. And she is one of many featured speakers. She is Dr. Kelsey Loftus, and she's got all kinds of acronyms behind her name, like so many of our guests do, whether it's DAT, LAT, ATC. I could probably go on. She's going to tell us what those acronyms are, and she works for the Montgomery County Fire and Rescue Services in Maryland. Kelsey, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Hey, thanks for being here. I know that we had a couple of little minor health challenges, so glad that we finally got you on, and so we can get some of your wisdom out there.
Right. I'm looking forward to hearing how my nasally congested voice across through video and through sound.
See, but this is a great example for our audience. Sometimes you just got to push through it, and the show still has to go on, right?
Yeah.
So let's go back to the basics, go to the foundation. How did you get involved in this? Obviously the DAT, LAT, ATC tells us that you're just this great trainer and you know about physical fitness and a lot of other things that tie to it. How did you get into this, and how did you get into this specifically in terms of athletic training for first responders?
Right. So my background is I came from a pretty strong first responder family. My dad is now retired law enforcement. He was with Fairfax County Police just over the river from us in Maryland, in Virginia for almost 28, 29 years. And my brother is also a career firefighter. He's actually in Charlotte, North Carolina now. So growing up, my brother was a volunteer firefighter all through high school when we were growing up, and then having my dad being law enforcement too, that police and fire was kind of a second family, as you obviously know too, of police was more so the people that I would see day in, day out, go visit my dad at the station, all those different things. And I always knew I wanted to get into a field where I was helping people similar to them. So medicine was always the route I always wanted to go towards, just kind of figuring out which route in medicine I wanted to go to. I thought about nursing. I really wanted to be a nurse in the military. Didn't really like as much of the blood and gore side of things. So that kind of got crossed off the list for me.
Yeah, if you're going to pass out with the blood and everything, that kind of crosses off the whole nurse EMT
right.
thing. So, yeah.
I was in a medical sciences program in high school, and we had a couple of rotations, and one that I had was in the emergency room. And I just was like, I don't think that this is for me. It didn't speak to me the way that I was hoping, in that kind of setting. And so I was trying to find another kind of setting that I would be interested in. I played sports all growing up. I played high-level softball for years and years, and had my fair share of injuries, but I had actually never experienced working with an athletic trainer. We had one in our high school that was full-time employed. He dealt with friends of mine on my team that had injuries. I just never, went and saw him for anything. I either just suffered through them, or I just went straight to orthopedics and physical therapy and kind of went that route. And I remember one day my mom was trying to help me figure out, what do I want to major in? Junior year in high school, I need to figure out what do I want to do in that next step and start seeing colleges and stuff. And she was like, oh, I saw there's this, field called athletic training, and we have someone like that at your school. Like, that would be pretty cool. You're doing medicine, you're doing sports medicine, you're helping athletes continue to be able to play and do the sports and stuff that they love. And I was like, that'd be really cool. I like sports and I like medicine, and that's, the two things together. And, shadowed a physical therapist. I knew I never wanted to work in an office setting. That just wasn't something that was for me. So the idea of having that physical therapy medicine background and being able to be on the sideline of a football game and deal with injuries as they happened was really interesting to me. So I ended up pursuing athletic training as my major in undergrad. And then at that time, while I was in high school, kind of parallel to this experience, my dad had a work-related injury. And at that time, I saw that impact that it had of, he was on light duty. He wasn't in his normal assignment. So he wasn't getting that same gratification every day of being a lieutenant in the position that he really wanted to be in. That was the point of him promoting. It was being in the field that he was in. And, he was in the quartermaster. So he was doing a lot of the logistics and, clothing and uniforms and all that stuff. And that just wasn't obviously what he wanted to do. And all of it was just because of this injury that he sustained at work. And while he was doing rehab, he was actually getting care from their athletic trainer. Her name was Nancy Burke. Her name is Nancy Burke, and she was who was worked there at the time. And I remember him coming home and saying, this is the person I've been working with. She does all my rehab. She's in our academy. She does, rehab for all the officers in the county. And it's really great to be able to be at work with my colleagues and people I know while I'm getting taken care of. Like, that morale boost is really huge. And I had never realized that this field that I was now interested in could be in this setting that I grew up in. So I was the black sheep in undergrad. I was the only one in my class that wanted anything to do with, public safety. Everyone wanted to go Division I sports, NFL, NBA, all those different things. And that just wasn't, I was the one kid in the back, like, I want to work with police officers, and people like, whatever, I want to work with Division I football. And it just, that's always what I knew in the back of my mind I wanted to do. And, nowadays, athletic trainers and public safety are, you see more of them. It's still an emerging, growing setting, but it's more established. But back then, there was very few. And back then was, 10 years ago at this point, that there really weren't too many people that I could be like, hey, what is this job like? Can I come shadow you? And Nancy Burke was actually that person for me that I spent the winter times when I was home from school. I would follow her around like a little kid in the academy, see how she treated the officers, kind of learned what that process looked like, and loved it. Like, I loved working with them. I loved seeing, helping with the recruits, because her office was embedded in the recruit academy, and just seeing the impact that she had on these officers' return to work and their ability to seek care very quickly with her. No different than, if a Division I football player sprained their ankle, they have that athletic trainer in that team that's right there with them. That's what she was for them too, was people would call her up, be like, hey, I have this XYZ injury. They would come see her. They would get an answer for what was going on. And then they had that care from that, point on. So that was always something that was very, very interesting, and seemed, to be a field that I knew I would get a lot of gratification and just feel like every single day I loved doing what I was doing, because I could see the impact that it was having on these officers. So when I first came out of undergrad, I went into the traditional setting. I worked in a high school, which is pretty much where a lot of athletic trainers fall once we graduate, is either college or high school. And during that time, I was always looking who's trying to hire an athletic trainer in, a police or fire department or whatever the case is, some kind of first responder setting. And about in 2023, actually end of 2022, the job that I'm in now popped up. And right now, Nancy Burke is now retired. There's another athletic trainer. Her name is Anna Sidori. She's amazing. I shadowed her. I was a doctoral resident with her too, with Fairfax County's police department. And she actually sent it to me. She was like, you need to apply to this. Like, this is exactly what you want to do. It was with the fire department, which I was like, whatever. Like, I want to do police, but okay, I'll go to the other side. And being a cops kid, like, we always gave crap to my brother because he went to the other side of things.
Yeah.
And now a word from our sponsor, Police Mortgage.
As a first responder, control matters on the job and at home. When it comes to buying or refinancing a house, Police Mortgage works specifically with first responders who want clear options, real guidance, and competitive rates. No confusion, no pressure, just experts who understand your world. Learn more at policemortgage.com or call 312-499-8878. Police Mortgage. for first responders who are second to none.
And learn more about Police Mortgage from their podcast, The Mortgage Beat, another podcast in the National Police Podcast Network.
Was going to be one of my most important questions is,
Yep.
how
How
at
did
the
that
at the
conversation go?
Thanksgiving dinner, how does,
Yep.
between your police officer father and your firefighter brother, how many
Yep.
arguments is that, who's got the tougher job? Does your dad toss out well, when you only work 1 out of every 3 days?
Right. On that, it's more the joke of, well, if you only scored a couple points higher, then you could have been a cop. Like, that's always the back and forth between the two is, fire says that police have to score better on the written test. It's a whole thing. But yeah, I remember that conversation of like, I think I want to do the fire department. My dad being like, I think that isn't what we should do. Like, you should be like, we had like my uncle is also in law enforcement. My grandmother's brother was in law enforcement. He was a major, like everyone was law enforcement in my family. My dad was retired military. He was military police and then police. Like, that's all we ever knew. And I think my brother saw the writing on the wall. Like, I kind of want to go to the fun side of things.
I'll work with the explosions and the fire. I don't want anybody shooting at me.
Oh yeah, like his thing always is saying, people are excited when the fire department shows up, not when the cops show up. So he likes the glory of it.
Yeah.
But
well, obviously, here at Public Safety Talk Radio, we love our police and our firefighters and EMTs and all those folks. But to your point, and you probably are even familiar with this, there's a whole company called Pro Team Tactical that was started by 2 former athletes in Indianapolis, where all they do is provide this type of physical training after an injury. And their whole thing, which is a lot what I'm hearing from you as an expert, is it's not that much different. An athlete getting hurt on the field or on the ice or on the diamond, or a police officer or firefighter getting hurt on the job. A lot of the rehab is the same. Is that just ignorant on my part, or am I picking something up there?
No, and that's exactly what I talk about in my presentation at the first responder conference, is just how similar the first responder is traditional athlete. So the first responder kind of falls into the category of what we like to call the tactical athlete, which when I tell some of my firefighters that they are tactical athletes, they like to laugh at that because they don't feel that they should be at that level. And really they are. They're doing these huge physical feats, these repetitive motions day in and day out. And the difference between them and a traditional athlete is there's no breaks, there's no off season. You can't just sit out. Like, that's not a possibility. So there's a lot of that overlap that you're expected to do these high levels of work, in short stints in some cases, and
right.
You have to give 110%. So it is true to, you should be treated in the tactical setting as an athlete, especially when you're doing physical therapy or any kind of rehab. What I find, and this was a lot of my motivation for working in this setting too, was there is still kind of a knowledge gap in the traditional, athletic training and physical therapy. We're kind of in the same world. Athletic trainers were more on the sideline. Physical therapists are kind of more in the office setting. But there is a lot of overlap and collaboration between the two that I found that there still is a knowledge gap of, how do you return this firefighter, this police officer, this corrections officer, this EMT or paramedic, how do you return them properly to work? And a lot of it is just mimicking their job functions. You can do a lot of that through any kind of functional training or functional rehab. Like, I was explaining to someone today at a station I was at that I had a firefighter that was returning to work after an ACL repair from a non-work related injury. And he was wanting to do some kind of functional training. So I worked alongside his physical therapist and had him at our recruit academy in an engine, in a truck, in our high-rise building. And, he was thinking he was going to be in all his gear, crawling around, doing all this stuff. I was like, nope, what we're going to do is you are going to get in and out of the engine over and over again. Because realistically, that's what they do all day. And because he had a knee repair, that's going to be really important because there's a huge step down. And
right.
battalion he was returning to, they have a lot of high-rise buildings and they run a lot of calls, like a lot of EMS calls. And he is an officer, so he was going to be likely on the engine or the truck. Mm-hmm. So, that was going to be the more repetitive movement for him versus, yes, he's going to have to crawl. He's going to have to do, these large feats of some kind of strength, but realistically, his day is probably going to be getting in and out of the unit, walking around with his PPE and SCBA on. That's exactly what we did. And mm-hmm. yes, I had him in gear, carrying a hose bundle up a couple flights of steps, all that stuff. But it's very easy to kind of, once you learn what their movements are and you at least watch them, which is a lot of what I did when I started working with the fire department, you start to pick up on how that tactical athlete and traditional athlete translate back and forth. That you see what are those repetitive movements that they're doing, which ultimately lead to a lot of their injuries. What are those movements that maybe aren't as frequent, but they have to be able to be stable and mobile enough to be resilient to any kind of stressor that might be put their way, because tactical athletes are expected to do this high level of work in super unpredictable conditions too. So there's no way that I can totally clear out a space for someone and make sure that they deadlift a patient properly. That's mm-hmm. not going to happen. That's very infrequent. So how can I make sure that this person is as mobile and stable as possible, that when they get in that unpredictable environment, their body is resilient to those stressors, they can do that heavy load, and then they can continue on without hurting themselves. So a lot of what I'll talk about in my presentation is explaining what are these common injuries and where are they coming from, and then mm-hmm. how, you can predict those injuries happening, because a lot of it can be very predictable, and people don't realize that. And I always tell the story of when I started with Montgomery County Fire 3 years ago. I pulled all the data from our occupational medical center and I looked through every single case from the last 2 years and tried to find what were the mechanisms of injury, when were people getting hurt, how were they getting hurt, where were they getting hurt. And I thought it was going to be really cool, like people being, I was pulling a person out of a building or I fell off a ladder. Mm. I kid you not, it was getting out of bed, putting your socks on, shop vacuuming the floor,
taking a piss,
bending over. I told this story today. Because I was at probably our busiest station in the entire county this morning, which I thought was very fitting before coming to talk to you, because they have the gamut of every kind of injury or issue that you could think of, that one of the guys there, he had a back injury and he did it. And I made the joke that I just said, he did it bending over to grab something out of the oven at the station. Yeah. So I was sitting there thinking, like, why is this happening? Like, these are activities of daily living, like normal things. So it all kind of came down to these repetitive movements and how their body is just being deteriorated, and they're building these, compensations. Their body is having to kind of create shortcuts for itself, or they're having these injuries and they're kind of putting them on the back burner so they can continue to work. So then those injuries are kind of compounding on themselves and creating these strange functions in the body that maybe are putting a lot more stress on their low back or a lot more stress on their rotator cuffs or a myriad of different things. So it's kind of like a big equation that once you see all the things and how they add up, it tells you exactly why you get the result that you do. So it's been fun to kind of visualize, but also test and see, why are these things happening? And it's also very satisfying for my firefighters is, they get an answer as to why. Like, everyone just kind of has assumed I'm always going to have back pain. I'm always going to have a shoulder injury, or I'm going to have a shoulder injury at some point. Kind of the adage is, it's not a matter of if, but when you have a shoulder surgery that, really that's preventable. Like, you could go your career and not have a shoulder surgery if you do X, Y, Z, or you're aware of, hey, I had this, issue with my shoulder or I have this immobility in my upper back. It's putting stress on my shoulder. I'm going to deal with it so that my shoulder is not put at risk for that injury. So it all kind of relates to each other and gives this clear or somewhat clear picture of why these things are happening. And that's, what I try to explain every single day in my job is giving you at least an answer. The people at work call me the trusted Google source, that if someone has a question as to why this might be happening, either I will tell you why, or I will go find you the right answer as to why. And for the back and shoulder injuries that we see so frequently, especially with the fire department, as soon as I tell them this is why, they're like, oh, yeah. I'm like, okay, and here's how you fix it, or here's how you prevent it. And it's very easy. They're going to have the crush injuries, they're going to have the falls and the slips. Those happen, but 75% of their injuries are these very preventable situations that if you give them the right tools, the right education, that injury risk is going to drop exponentially for them. And we've seen that in the county in the last, I think, year or so, probably last calendar year, was the number of preventable injuries dropped almost by half because we weren't seeing the getting out of bed, throwing your back out, putting your socks on, throwing your back out. Those very small things. We were seeing more of the non-preventable, like, crush injuries of hands and cuts on hands or things of that nature versus scrolling through and seeing the people that were coming in for the silly, like all the different, things that I just talked about, that those are very infrequent now. And the ones that do have them, maybe just I haven't been to their station and worked with them or seen them, and they haven't gotten that education directly, that it hasn't made that same impact, because we have, almost 2,000 firefighters.
Sure.
I can't get in front of every single one of them, even though I try, but you do kind of have those couple that fall through the cracks too.
Well, it's one of the things, it's as you were talking, I was kind of thinking, I've had a bad back for years and just dealt with it. And, thinking about the idea of cumulative trauma, that hey, the knee or the back or the shoulder isn't going out on this huge 3 alarm fire, but 2 days later, like a buddy of mine, he sneezes. His whole freaking back goes out. Now, it wasn't because of the sneeze. It was because of all this stuff that happened before.
Right.
I even kind of remember, being, when last time my back went out, which fortunately has been close to 10 years, thank God, is I was on a sailboat and helping out my friend with the ropes in a really high windy day on a Sunday. And then Tuesday, literally like 36 hours later, just got out of bed, kind of wrong. And all of a sudden I couldn't walk.
Right.
It's like this cumulative trauma, or, it doesn't necessarily happen at the time. It's not the sneeze. It's what's happened for weeks and months and even years beforehand. Is that a good way of putting it? Or am I just nuts? Or both?
No, that's exactly right. I really like to use the metaphor of somebody's car, because everyone's had to have work done on their car. Everyone's had to have some kind of, issue that they've brought to the auto body shop, that, if you constantly have your, passenger side forward tire always going bald, are you just going to keep replacing the tire? Or are you going to see, is the axle off? Is there something to do with the underlying body of the car that's putting more stress onto that wheel? Or, you could take the easy way and just keep replacing the wheel every 6 months, and then it's just going to continue to be a problem. So I find that it's very easy for the general population, but obviously for first responders too, that we tend to just replace the wheel over and over again. So we're taking ibuprofen, we're, maybe, getting a massage like one time, but we're not doing a whole lot of extra work with it. Or we're just ignoring it completely and accepting it as something that, everyone gets back pain, or everyone has this at some point, and then not using the resources available to them or finding that answer as to why this keeps continuously happening to them. So that's really the big piece I try to educate on is, it's very important to actually look at the axle of the car, because, there's no point in continuously putting effort in to replace that wheel when eventually maybe that wheel gets so bald that it flies off and then the whole car wrecks. That's ultimately the straw that breaks the camel's back in a lot of instances, where someone has that specific injury that's more traumatic, that just accumulated over time. So, you're never going to go in, I've said this before, when there's an issue with the axle, you're not going to go get your car painted. Like, why? There's no point. So if we can go to the underlying issue, find out why this keeps happening, then you can treat that. And then ultimately, globally in your body, you're going to see that relief, or you're not going to have that resurgence of injury over and over and over again. So, it's in watching people and watching the people that I work with, I can almost pick out for someone like, hey, you probably have back pain, don't you? Like just watching them, or watching someone and being like, hey, you know, do you have issues with like your right shoulder or something? Like it's very easy to kind of see that in someone. And then there are ways that you can do functional testing with them, or even just have the conversation and evaluate them from the sports medicine side of things and find out like, what is that root issue that keeps continuously causing, you know, these global problems. Or the best example is, I had told someone today as well, because we were talking about knee pain, was when I treat someone for knee tendonitis, like that non-specific knee pain that's on the front part of your knee, jumper's knee. I almost never touch the knee. I always look above and below, because it's like a big chain. If you've got a kink somewhere else in the chain, the whole rest of that chain is going to be weakened. So when someone's having this patellar tendonitis, knee tendonitis pain, I am first going to look at their hip, and I'm going to see, you know, is there some kind of hip tension or guarding that's changing the way that they're walking, and it's putting more stress on their knee? Do they have limited mobility and movement in their ankle, and that's changing how they're walking or how their hip stance is, and it's putting more stress on their knee? You know, if they're a runner, how do their shoes look? What kind of shoes do they wear? Are those shoes right for their kind of foot type? You know, if they have a certain foot type, is it a flat foot? Is it a really high arch? Like, it's looking at all these other areas that are probably leading to this knee issue versus, you know, I could take the easy way out and just throw all the modalities at a knee issue. Be like, all right, put heat, kinesio tape, do a little bit of stretching, and yeah, that'll make it probably feel okay, but that pain's going to keep coming back. So it's looking at that root issue, and in some instances, like the knee, I may not even touch the knee, and then we fix the problem.
So what you're saying is the recurring injury that I've had for 20 years in my left tricep that I keep ignoring and just taking ibuprofen for might be emanating from my right knee.
No, not necessarily. But maybe. I mean, there's so
glad to see you're paying attention. You know, by the way, nobody needs a freaking PhD to watch me get out of bed in the morning and know that I got a back problem. But anyhow, continue.
Right. And there are some weird connections like that I'm a good example. I broke my left big toe, and they put me in a walking boot, which was like walking with a concrete block, and my toe healed, but I had a lot of bad issues with my right hip, because I was having to change the way that I walked to drag this boot along with me. So, you know, even though they're very far from each other and they're on the opposite sides of the body, they were interconnected and created these changes for, you know, how I had to function when I had this walking boot. And I personally have scoliosis that changes the hip height that I have, that my right foot is my right leg is a little bit shorter than my left. So not only am I elevating my foot with this boot on my left leg and making it a harder distance that this foot has to travel, I'm also having to kind of teeter-totter my way down the street or over the sidewalk and stuff with this concrete block, that it made a lasting impact on my right hip that I still deal with. And this was an injury I had in 2024, May of 2024. So it's all interconnected in these really interesting ways, and the body is so interesting when you look at it globally like that, or holistically, is always how I tell people. That's the way that I treat, is not just putting blinders on and only looking at like your tricep issue that you're having. It's like, okay, what's going on around that area? And like I said, a lot of it can be tailored back to specifically for firefighters and police officers too, is, you know, how they carry their equipment. What kind of equipment do they have that they wear day in and day out? My favorite example is, you know, if you were to guess, what do you think is one of the most common injuries I saw with canine handlers or canine officers? If you were just to guess.
That was part 1 of our conversation. Tune in next week for part 2.
Public Safety Talk Radio is produced by Bader Training and Consulting. Public Safety Talk Radio is also proud to be a part of the growing National Police Podcast Network. The National Police Podcast Network is a dedicated media network powered by the National Police Federal Credit Union, developed in partnership with experienced podcast professionals and public safety advocates. Learn more about the National Police Federal Credit Union at nationalpolicefcu.com.